I hope you've been enjoying talking books and stuff. Please support us on Patreon to help cover our costs. Please click on the Patreon links or you can visit our GoFundMe page. Thank you.
Hi, welcome to Talking Books and Stuff, the program that talks all about books and writing and stuff. Here's your host, Dennis Rimmer.
Welcome back to another episode of Talking Books, where we talk about books and writing and stuff. And some of the stuff we're going to talk about today is with Wilson Large, a filmmaker and web series maker, producer, writer, director. He's based in Bellingham, Washington, a place I know well. And Wilson, I keep wanting to call you Walter, but that's wrong. Wilson Large, what is your story? Where did the Wilson Large saga begin?
Oh gosh, in a galaxy far, far away, sort of. A little town called Port Townsend, Washington, is where the saga began for me in terms of my earliest memory. I was born in Oregon, but I grew up in a small town. Was always influenced very heavily by stories, particularly sci-fi, fantasy type stories, and just always had a passion for storytelling. I was one of those kids with a little tape recorder and would record my own radio shows. My parents were good enough to get me the BBC Star Wars radio play, and I'd listen to The Shadow on tape because it wasn't actually playing in the mid 80s, but or early 80s, I guess it would be, and late 70s. But yeah, so I was exposed to all this storytelling that just really inspired me to do my own, and so I still have recordings of me as a I don't know, 6-year-old probably with my maybe 7-year-old and my younger sister who's 4 years younger than me, or at least was. She's passed away now, but she would be she'd do screams, and I'd have my Simon Says game, and I'd do sound effects for the computer, and have a chain and a metal garbage can for Foley, and so that's kind of where storytelling started for me.
Now you're a filmmaker, so you're all about images. But did you read much as a kid?
I read a lot of comic books. I've always been a comic book reader, and I am that way because my imagination is a bit too active, and I've struggled always reading books, and I've read books. I certainly can get through books, but it takes me quite a long time because I will wind up reading and I'll start visualizing the things, and then I'll just kind of get caught up in visuals and side thoughts, and I have to wind up rereading a paragraph 5 times to get it to sink in. And with comic books, I don't have that. I think because the visual is laid out there, it keeps my brain more focused on the story that is being told through the words and the pictures. So yes, I have read books, and there are some that stick out in memory, like in school. I had to read Dickens, and I really enjoyed Great Expectations and Great Gatsby, and some of those classics. But comic books has always been the major literary influence in my life.
Well, I guess with comic books for a filmmaker, that's kind of like a ready-made storyboard.
Exactly. Yeah, it definitely is, which is in large part why when funding did not make itself readily available to carry on the Dark Darkness story after we finished the web series, or the pilot web series, I realized like, oh, I should just make the comic book version of the screenplay, because then it's like, it's a storyboard version of the script, and I can have a product to promote, build an audience, and that seemed like a good idea, and I think it's going great.
Wilson Large is with us today, based in Bellingham, Washington. So how'd you get from Port Townsend to Bellingham?
My parents got divorced in 83 or 82, I think, and so my stepdad we moved to Bellingham. I'm not entirely sure why. Bellingham was the closest, maybe city, but not big city. Or maybe there was some talk amongst my parents that, like, because my stepdad did wind up coming to Bellingham to go to Western. So maybe, that was like kind of the plan to keep the family sort of together, was like he was going to come and go to school, and we were going to come and live, and my mom got a job. And I was just entering the 6th grade at that time, and started going to school at Perry Middle School. And so to me, Bellingham was like the big city. I'll never forget one of the first nights we came here, side tangent, story time. We had moved up by the Western Washington University, and decided to take a walk through town on a Friday night and see what it was like. And for those people who have lived in Bellingham for a very long time, they might remember where the Pita Pit is now on Holly. There used to be this place called the Flame Tavern, and it had a reputation that matched the name. It was just a raucous place. And so here we were walking down Railroad Avenue to check out the new town, and there's a couple ladies outside the Flame Tavern, stumbling all over, trying to fight, and so frustrated that they couldn't walk straight. One of them pulled her boots off because she thought it was the boots and not the massive amounts of alcohol she had consumed. And as a 6th grader, I was like, wow, this is really the big city, Whoa, they got bar fights and everything going on out here.
Welcome to Bellingham. Yes, the Flame Tavern, I remember. Now that you mention it's right on the corner there, down by Railroad Avenue.
Yeah. It was a shining beacon of the biker life, I guess.
Wilson Large is with us, a filmmaker based in Bellingham. Now, Dark Darkness started out as a web series. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about Dark Darkness?
Oh, I'd love to. It's my favorite thing to talk about. So just to set the record straight, Dark Darkness actually was a serial play that took place as part of the Idiom Theater's annual event called Serial Killers. And what it was a group of playwrights were chosen. There's typically 6 of them. And this was the reason it was called Serial is because it happened every week, and a new episode had to be written every week to carry on this, I think it was a month and a half program. And so every week, the audience would vote for their least favorite play of the 6 that started, and then they would essentially, quote unquote, kill the play from the roster. And so then the next week, all the remaining 5 plays would continue to write their serial plays. And so until you get to the end, there's 2 plays left. And this was 2008. I had gone, I didn't know any of the people involved with it at the time. And I just fell in love with the characters and the story, and it had the good fortune to make it all the way to the final, so he got to finish the story, where it wound up taking second place to a kind of a highbrow drama type things that took first place. But I've always been kind of a sci-fi fantasy nerd. And so here was this story with these amazing characters that after it was over, I really, really missed those characters. And I thought, well, as a filmmaker, here's an opportunity for me to tell a story that's been tested because, you know, it's my belief that the thing that makes stories build an audience is when the audience really identifies with the characters. And so this story had four main characters. It had Ronald, who is just a nerdy kind of pop culture reference, a socially awkward Dungeons and Dragons master who doesn't seem to have any powers whatsoever, but he gets invited to this darkness convention. And then you've got Mordecai, who's a dread vampire wizard, also running around disguised as Jesus because he's hiding from someone. And then you have Ganamazul, who's a sorceress ninja queen with great powers, and her and Mordecai have a history. And then you have Jerry, who's kind of a mild-mannered diplomat, but when he looks normal, human, but when he gets mad, he morphs into this snake man, and he also communicates with reptiles telepathically. So you got a wide variety of cool superpowers. You've got kind of a window into the story through the nerd, Ronald, and they all have their independent issues. Mordecai has anger management issues. Jerry, the snake man, is kind of timid and has trouble making friends with people because he's just used to having his snake friends. And then Ganamazul is a queen of a ninja army, and so she's, you know, battling her sort of warrior spirit, wants her to just go out and be free and have adventures, whereas the duties of queenship require her to be responsible. And so that serial play is what started this all for me. And I got to meet the actors and the writer, and we developed a relationship, and I got permission to make the web series. Now, when I started the web series in 2011, I did not want to dive right into the main story that was the serial play because this was pretty, fresh and new, and I wasn't sure exactly what direction I was going with the design and all these things. So I wrote what I call prequels, where each of the characters gets their invitation to the Darkness Convention. So it gave me a chance to explore the world, build backstory, and without diving right into the main content, which is now being delivered in a comic book form. I'll stop there, and because I could go on for quite a bit longer, but let me take a pause and see what you think of what I said so far.
Well, I think that's a super story. So darkness. You said it started as a web series, like out there for the general public to see. So is it still available anywhere?
Yeah. The web series that I created is on the Fantasy Network, which is a great platform. If I could just talk about the Fantasy Network and how amazing they are for filmmakers. Also, I know the people who started it. If you're ever looking for more interesting content for your platform, I can put you in touch with them. But I had produced some shows for some of the people who run the Fantasy Network, and it's a really great, having produced and distributed a few movies before in the past. There's terrible practice in the filmmaking world, of film and distribution, where filmmakers never see any money from their projects. And so this is a monthly subscription platform, primarily focused on fantasy, but they are getting into sci-fi as well. And they pay their filmmakers. So I get a check every quarter for the views that I get on Dark Darkness. Now I also have Dark Darkness currently. I'm not sure how much longer I'll keep it there, but it is on YouTube, and the way to get there is through our website, www.darkdarkness.com. And if you click on the YouTube icon on our website, then it'll take you to the pilot web series.
And you say Dark Darkness now you're turning into a comic book. Now is that ready for release yet, or what's the progress there?
Yeah, so the evolution was that the web series was not I was not able to build a business model that showed a profit large enough to support the production of the story. And then I explored feature filmmaking as another option, and that definitely had some business models where I could do that. So I rewrote the web series that now is basically picks up the story as I saw it as a serial play. And so when I finished that screenplay as a feature film, I decided then to take that screenplay and start doing it as a comic. We finished issue 1. It is printed and ready, and I'm a little behind. I've got to get a sales portal going on my website so that people can order that on the website, but it should be up soon. Issue number 2 is almost done and ready for print, and it's going to be about a 6-issue series, so we've got 4 more to make.
Now, how do you find time in your busy day to do all this stuff? What's a day like, a typical day like in the life of Wilson Large?
Oh, I like to stay really busy. It's kind of my fun. I am kind of a workaholic, but when you love what you do so much, it's hard to call it work. And I just get up. I'm a freelance film and video professional. It's how I make my living. So, the nice thing about that is that I have, just kind of piecemeal type of job. So, I might get a gig that lasts a day. I might get a gig that lasts half a day. I might get a gig that lasts a month. Those are very rare. And so typically, I try and fill my calendar just enough to cover all my expenses, which are fairly low because I live in a house that I purchased through the local land trust that keeps the mortgage low. And so I keep my expenses down, and it frees me up to do both the freelance work, and then when I'm not freelancing, I'll come in, I'll open, either a script. I've got a couple other projects going at the moment, and I'll do some writing, or on the comic book, I use Asana to manage all the pages that come in from the line artist and the colorist and the letterer. And so from my script, they deliver, a product. I review it, give a few notes if necessary, get another draft back. We get it till it's good. We lock it down, and then move on to the next page. And so it's super interesting, Dennis. It's so interesting because everything. One day I'll be in 1 week I might be like filming Sammy Hagar doing a concert at Tulalip Casino, and then I'll be filming a live performance at the Sylvia Center, or I'll be working on a commercial for a local business, learning about canine day spas, or I might be doing a budget breakdown for another independent filmmaker, or I might go and light a set for a different independent filmmaker, or I might edit with motion graphics something else that someone else has shot. It's always interesting. I'm either, I'm building, I'm learning about, financing film. So building a pitch deck to show investors, to get funding for a feature horror film I'm doing, having meetings. It's super interesting.
No kidding. We're talking with Wilson Large. Let's say you're a multimedia artist now, based in Bellingham, a filmmaker primarily, let's say. So, do you remember the first movie you ever saw?
Well, it's funny because I actually don't remember the experience of seeing the movie, but the experience changed my life so drastically that I sort of remember that I had seen it. And that was the first Star Wars movie when I was 5. I saw Star Wars, and I don't really remember the experience of sitting in the theater and watching it, but I remember that I was infected at that point with this love of Star Wars. And so, yeah, that was probably the most influential thing for me as a filmmaker. Indiana Jones, Raiders of the Lost Ark was another one, because I definitely remember seeing that one. And I definitely remember seeing on TV some like behind the scenes featurettes. And that was kind of when it struck me that the magic of making movies was almost better than the final product. Is just the process. So those are the two big influencers on me as a young person.
Now, on that same line, then, would you say the first Star Wars was your favorite movie, or do you have a favorite movie of all time?
It was definitely Empire Strikes Back, because again, that movie I definitely remember. The first viewing, we went to Seattle to see it at some big theater. The line went around the building twice, and and arguably it's the best Star Wars film in the franchise, and it was for sure, I'd say easily my favorite movie.
On those same lines again, speaking of, oops, that was me hitting something, making movies, there's a few films out now apparently that were made on cell phones. Do you do any of that stuff?
Yeah, I mean, kind of. My latest gig was at, and this is, when I say gig, that's means like my freelance job that I had to make money doing film and video type stuff, was actually not very film or video-y. I was an audiovisual technician for a Christmas light festival at T-Mobile Park in Seattle, and we had some downtime, so I pulled out I've got a DJI Osmo, which is kind of a cell phone camera, but it's a little more advanced, and just shot a bunch of silly shots of the crew and the different people doing their jobs, goofing off to kind of commemorate the event, which was had a fair amount of disorganization and stress, and people were kind of worked up, and the act of pulling out the camera and working together and making a silly little behind the scenes video, I think brightened people's spirits and gave them a common thing to do that was creative and fun, and kind of let off some of the frustrations that were building up with some people. So it was really fun. I hope to have that finished here pretty soon in the edit.
And these days, Wilson Large, based in Bellingham, Washington, what excites you the most these days?
In what regard?
Anything and everything. When you get up in the morning, get out of bed, what makes you go, yeah, this is what I'm going to do today?
Honestly, it's just continuing on with the Dark Darkness comic book. I should add that the feature film script, which the comic book is based on, is under a shopping agreement with Voyage Media. production company out of California, and we are looking for other production companies to partner with to make the feature film happen. So that's always exciting to work towards and push towards, as well as finishing up the comic book, which has been just so much fun as an avid comic book fan and reader to be able to dive into the comic book. There's certainly a learning curve for me there, but you know, being a storyteller, it wasn't impossible for me to dive into. There were some pretty big hurdles emotionally that were kind of daunting, but that's kind of just part of what you do as a filmmaker, is you jump over hurdles, because it's nothing but hurdles all the time. And maybe that's what gets me excited, is jumping over hurdles, because I can't seem to get enough of it. And then I've got this horror film that is hopefully going to be shooting up in Vancouver here in a few months, that I'm pretty excited about getting back into, because I had to kind of put that down for a little bit for the month of December.
So that's what's in store for you basically then in 2020, more of the same?
Yeah, I'm really, really excited to get back into like large crew narrative filmmaking. I've had some experience with large crews, but it's not something I get to do on the regular. And there's something really, really, really amazing and magical about collaborating with people who have all these different talents and perceptions, and there's a real kind of a family that happens, and I'm super, super excited to get back into that kind of environment with the horror film.
Well, that sounds great. Wilson Large is with us. We're going to have to wrap it up today. How do we get in touch with you again, that website again?
Yeah, you can email me at Wilson, WILSON, at darkdarkness.com, and the website is darkdarkness.com.
Very good. Wilson Large from Bellingham, Washington, filmmaker, multimedia artist, we'll say. Comic books, writes scripts, makes movies, does all sorts of other stuff. Wilson, best of luck to you in 2020, and thanks for being with us today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on the show, Dennis. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for visiting with us today. This is Talking Books and Stuff with Dennis Rimmer. Contact him at dennis@talkingbooks.tk. Thank you, and may all the good news be yours. Oh, and don't forget to check out his book, The Great Canadian Notebook, available across Canada and at amazon.ca.